Man, I am excited about this interview. David and I have been looking forward to this for quite some time. I got up early this morning. I was going through your book, Cassie, and highlighting and starring and underlining and making notes and just have how all these questions. We could probably go for multiple hours on this conversation, but we'll
Easy.
keep it to an hour. Um, Cassie, I'm excited
Well, you
about
know what?
this.
We can only promise part one will stay in an hour, and then
Part
part
one.
two and part three
Okay, good.
we'll
I'm in
subsequently decide
important.
then. Cassie, I'm also extremely excited about today, and just the power of your book is hard to fathom. And I'll tell you a little thing that happened to me last night, and your book immediately came to mind, and I thank God for you and the book. Um, we allowed my children some leeway to stay up later. It's the summertime, and I have a 7-year-old boy and a 11-year-old boy, and they often fight, constantly fight. But last night, getting late, they were playing Legos and they wanted to continue, and they were getting along. And my wife and I go to bed relatively early, and we're just like, hey, you guys go ahead. And so I passed out. I'm asleep. I don't even know how long. They must have been up another hour building, and they came into our bedroom and woke me up. And when I'm woken up from a deep sleep, it's usually not like a beautiful. It's not the moment that I most graciously honor our Lord. Let's just say that. And I was like, boys, and my wife either. We are like, come on, guys, like we trusted you. We're not gonna trust you again. And my little guy ran out of the room crying. And I was like, that's an interesting response. Well, what they did, they're really skilled at building Legos. They've been building war vehicles, right? We were in the military, war vehicles. They built me a little tank and a little car, and they were bringing them in, and they wrote a note, a handwritten note on why they built it for me and because they love me. And I've been so whatever. I've been such a good daddy lately. This is what they wrote. The 7-year-old in particular, and I broke his heart in that moment. And so I didn't realize it. I woke up. I'm like, dude, I gotta go. And the reason I share that story in the context of this book is because and I had some rebuilding, and I lots of kisses, lots of hugs, and I snuggled them for hours, and it got tons of less sleep. But it really, in the context of your book being forefront of my mind, it showed me a very, very tangible way that the level of impact and power that a father's influence has on their children,
Yeah.
and how high they were in something they did in service to me that they thought was important and they spent time in, and how quickly I diminished that and destroyed their dreams and hopes. But then was able to restore that,
Yeah, yeah.
and it just was such a tangible view of what we truly have, the impact that we can have in this world as dads.
Yeah, the impact is generally much bigger than we guess, and I think affirmation, and this is what he was looking for. He was actually not only wanting to compliment you and write you a letter of appreciation, he was actually looking for that affirmation coming back to him and say, because is this a 7-year-old? Because age is always absolutely critical. Now, I always say to the dads, between 6 and 8 years old, you got to affirm them 6 times before you correct them 1 time. Now, to change that in our culture, specifically the culture that I grew up, because it's like a 6-time correction and a 1-time
Yeah, I
affirmation.
was gonna say it's opposite.
It's opposite. So you've got to swing it to the other end, because that is the time where their self-worth is established. Am I worthy? Am I valuable? Am I significant? What is my unique significance? Super important between 6 and 8. So just valuing them is really important. So therefore, if they do something like that, if you're not available or you react opposite to what you're supposed to react, then obviously that hurts them. But well done, you recovered well. So that's good. So that's no blame on you. But it's important that dads would know this. That their focus of their mind it is mainly affirmation, because affirmation is a stronger educator than correction. So that principle you got to really remember and be attentive to and focus on self-control so that you can really do that. And you got to acquire that skill, because some people say, yeah, my boy is not good in sport or anything else. So what can I really affirm? You affirm values, you affirm small little things that they do that is beneficial, a smile, a hug, whatever it is. So that is super important, and I think it was waiting for that, and actually well done for what you ended up to do. But that's critical that we're attentive to that. Yes.
Yeah, so we use this podcast basically for our own mentorship session. So this is just going to be a podcast of all the dad fails that we've done for the past, 12, 13 years with our kids. And then you can just correct us on everything we do. Is that okay?
If you have done wrong, I will.
Again, it's going to be a multiple part podcast series with you for all of our dad fails. Somewhat kidding, kind of. But hey, if you could, let's just go back a little bit and give our audience, for those who haven't read this book, The World Needs a Father, haven't heard of you, you have a little bit of an accent. You're not in Denver, Colorado, like we are. Tell us who you are and what do you do, please.
Okay. I'm a South African, so born in South Africa, and my ancestors came here in 1720, I think, so for 300 years. So in South Africa, grew up here, and my native language or my mother tongue is not English. My wife's mother tongue is English, so I married an English girl that has British origin, and I'm just, you could say, Dutch or German origin, and so that's probably the accent that you pick up. It's actually very strange. My grandfather, whose name was Casparus Brink. My first name is also Casparus, not Cassie. Cassie is actually, you say it Cassie, but we say Cassie, and so that's a female name in America, I know. So so if you want to go with my original name, it's Casparus. So that's my birth name. So my grandfather Casparus Brink fought against William Bray, and William Bray was the great-grandfather of my wife in the Anglo-Boer War in South Africa. So obviously we had to settle the Anglo-Boer War in South Africa before we could have a harmonious life together.
Wow.
That's awesome. Wow. That's crazy.
Hey,
Talk about a rocky beginning.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, another rocky beginning you hit on in like chapter 1, page 1 of the book is just your experience in Africa with what the impact of fatherlessness is doing. Could you kind of just give a quick insight to that?
Yeah, insight to the experience or to the fatherless condition of Africa?
The experience that kind of got in motion your mission.
Yeah, 2002. So I was invited to do leadership training at a refugee camp called Nyarangusu. It's in the middle of Africa. It's in the western part of Tanzania, which is close to the Congolese border. And they had 10 refugee camps there with 50,000 people each. So an enormous amount of people in refugee camps. So we trained the leaders of one camp. And then I had leeway time towards the end. And I just thought, let me just talk to some of the leaders there to discover, why do you end up in a refugee camp? What went wrong? Is it that you're not capable of working or whatever? What made you live in the refugee camp? And I was not expecting what I got. Because one after the other told me how horrifically family members were slaughtered in front of their eyes. I mean, dismembered, cut up in pieces. Pregnant women sliced open and taking babies out and slice them up, and just the most horrific thing. So here I'm sitting in a mud hut, and I'm not reading this in a paper. This guy is looking in my face, and in my soul, I felt, and looking in my and telling me these stories. So I cried out to God after number 5, 6. I thought I would lose my mind. This is the big thing. I was absolutely convinced. And I'm not an emotional guy. I'm a phlegmatic guy, which means the reality hits later. But at that moment, I thought I would lose my mind. It was as if someone ripped open my rib cage and just sliced me up. I was done. And I cried out to God, and I said, God, what is wrong with Africa? Because the background of this is, I started before that a leadership school where we train 30 leaders from about 20 plus countries every year for 3 months. So here I'm training. I've already trained more than 30 leaders from more than 30 nations of Africa. So the idea of leadership training is you train them to do something. You train them to make a contribution to their country. So my whole mind is filled with that every day of my life. How can I empower people to make a difference in their nation? But I did not see the reality of a nation, because many people, they're oblivious of what is really happening. So they in their little bubble, and if you have money, then you can secure yourself and stay in your comfort zone. And suddenly I was out of my comfort zone and confronted with this reality in Africa, with a genocide and where they killed so many people. And I didn't know what to say or to do. And I suddenly understood that I'm living in Africa, but South Africa, though, Cape Town, though, which looks like California sometimes, it's well developed. And right here, we have this in the middle of Africa. And I cried out and I said, God, you better tell me what is wrong with Africa, because I cannot continue to do leadership training if I don't know what to train people for. And then God was just so clear. It was a very definite instruction: lift up your head, look left, like that specific instruction. And as I looked left, there was this one little window, and I saw these 300 kids outside, about 6 years old, and with the soccer balls that they can't buy anything there. So they make it from plastic bags that they wrap and tie together. And God said to me, the big problem of Africa is fatherlessness. And I missed that word in the Bible. Can you believe it? I had 9 years of formal theological training. And by some other means, I missed the word fatherless. I just read over it. It was just a general word, like orphan. So I was not sensitized to that word. And then God said, the problem of Africa is fatherlessness. You train fathers for these boys by training soccer coaches for them. Instruction was very particular. And I knew nothing about soccer. I didn't even know that Manchester United existed. I was a rugby coach. I was a rugby player. So I knew rugby. And I said to God, please talk my language. I know rugby. And also I'm white. White guy. In those days, white kids would not play soccer. It's better now. But in those days in South Africa, they would play cricket and rugby and golf and tennis and stuff like that, but not soccer. And you go and you do something that you know nothing about, that your skin color is wrong, your church affiliation is wrong, your mind is, everything is wrong. So I was a mess. But I just said to God, here am I, whatever you tell me to do, I will do. And that's where the journey started. So God decided to use the most useless guy ever for addressing fatherlessness in this world.
Yeah, I love how that's how he works, right? And how his strength is perfected in our weakness, and it's it's obviously no mistake, but I think it's really interesting to me. And I'll tell you, anybody who hasn't read the book, you get a couple pages in, and it is devastating, right? The truth that you highlight that you just talked about, and the detail, particularly you're talking about one person, and it's fascinating because you asked a question like, why are you not with your people? Like, it was almost a judgment, right? And I think a lot of us watch the news and we see these refugee camps and we very quickly pass a judgment, or we think we understand the issue and we have no idea, even conceptually, we can't even conceive of the level of trauma and just despair. But when I was reading through some of the accounts you made, and they were very similar, these people were watching until they could bear it no longer, and then they ran. And the one individual you're talking about, he's like, that was my daughter and my grandchild. Like, these are not distant, they're not even necessarily just friends, it's family that this is happening to, and it's devastating. And I'm curious, you talked about the pathologies and how a lot of that relates. The number one determining factor for a lot of these crimes and situations is fatherlessness, and it's been attributed. It's data. This is not religious dudes talking about religion. This is data, and I'm curious. What hit me was, how do we convince dads? How do we teach them? How do we convince them of their power and their influence? How do we make it so that, we in the Kinetic Man, we talk about purpose all the time. And we talk about how, especially when you leave the military, most of our networker guys that are in and or leaving the military, you lose a sense of purpose. How do you help men to realize that the purpose of dad and father is so high, not just provider, not just, contribute. No, it's dad. The purpose of that is such a high bar. And how do we convince ourselves of that? How do we teach ourselves to do that?
Sure. I think that is the quest. That is the question behind everything that we do, because every day we try and find new ways to teach dads, because my goodness, the apathy of dads is enormous. And I have always asked myself, what can we attribute this to? Why do dads not end up on God's agenda for growing families? Why do they find their own agenda? Now, one of the big issues is what the Bible says: at the end of times, people will be lovers of themselves. So dads are really super keen when they love something. When you love golf, you don't ask how much effort you have to put into play golf. It just happens. When you're ambitious and you want to reach a position somewhere, you don't say, oh man, I only want to work 5-6 hours a day. You go beyond 10 and you don't even count, because you're ambitious. Because if you loved and you're drawn to it, then you do it. So firstly, we don't understand anymore how to love at all. We understand how to love ourselves, but God simply has to fill us with the Holy Spirit, that we can get out of the self-centeredness of love and become other-centered. And and we don't even start with our own family often on this one. So that must be a work of the Holy Spirit, is the first thing I want to say. Secondly is, I'm trying in the book to at least bring enough information that people's eyes would open and say, oh goodness, I know nothing about this. I thought I knew how to be a father, but obviously I don't know how to be a father, because I don't know what the child needs at year 1, at year 2, at year 3, at year 4, and so on. So I'm ignorant. And in this case, if I am ignorant, your child is fatherless. That's as simple as that. Your child is fatherless, because he is then developed, formed, shaped by a father that doesn't know at all how to father. So that means your child is fatherless. He counts amongst the numbers of the fatherless of this world. So that is an effort that we're trying to do to help people, but also to show them the result. If you do not father right, then this child carries that father wound, mother wound. Now they have other words for it: trauma. They call it small t. Big trauma is when abuse happens to you, and small t is when neglect. So you're deprived of something that you should have had, that small trauma. So your children grow up with T trauma and post-traumatic stress syndrome. We know about that. And most people grow up with that. And then they have the results. You see it in businesses. You see it in divorces across the world. You see it in failed marriages. You see it in bad leadership in this world, so that the whole world is suffering. And this is exactly what the Psalm 68 says, when God said, the world is trembling because of you leaders not addressing fatherlessness. And this is exactly what is happening now. So we try to wake up people, but we find that the best way is from father to father. Obviously, you don't want mothers or ladies to come and accuse the dads of being bad and so on. So it's, in that sense, it's a men's movement. But also we have a complementary training for the women, for the mothers, that match with the men in support. But we hope that men would wake up each other and say, come on, buddy, come on, let's do it together. Let's have a move of men across the world, getting people into move, kinetic men. Let's get this move of men that are created by God with a specific intent to represent God, the Father. And let me just say this. I'm sorry, it's talking long, but let me just say
Please
this.
go.
The thing that shocked me, and I don't think I mentioned this in the book, because that happened after I wrote the book. In Indonesia, I heard a pastor asking the question, who was the first fatherless in this world? And everyone is guessing this, that, and the other. And we came down to Adam, because he had to move out of paradise, out of the presence of the Father. And then the pastor said, no, I'm sorry, you forget the most important thing. Satan was the first fatherless. He walked out of the authority of his father. And therefore, from day one, that was his main objective. And now he's succeeding in this. because he made Adam fatherless, and then one after the other after the other. And now we reap the results of that. So if fathers can just understand, God had a very specific intent to get his image, his way of doing things across to this world through fathers and mothers, if some people complain concerning that statement, and mothers, but fathers cannot neglect and turn a blind eye to their responsibility.
It's such an interesting thought. David and I both grew up in for a period of time, single family homes. Our parents were divorced when we were young, and eventually, replaced with stepfathers. And I think there's a stat now of 1 in 4 families, children live in fatherless homes. And in my mind, that's always just been like, there's not a dad there at all, right? Not even there. It's just a single family home, single mom running the household. But it's an interesting thought to just call fatherlessness also just dads are there, but they just don't know what they're doing. Like they have no knowledge or information, and they're just running on the treadmill of life and thinking that working in their career and providing money for their family to put food on the table and keep the lights on is enough. And there's this quote that I wrote down from your book. It says, you cannot elevate provision above love as necessary contributions from the father. And I think that's key. And a lot of people don't think about that as their role of a father being more than just provider, being more than just provision. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think for us, the solution lies in focusing on children and their needs. So all human beings, the 2 predominant needs of all human beings, after reading so many things, I believe, belonging and value. Belonging and value. So that is, you got to create that safe environment through selfless love. Otherwise, it's not safe environment. It's not love. I taught my children never to use the word love without explanation. Never. Because it's like this, general word that means nothing. The Greeks had 4 words for it. We only have this one thing, and we love between dogs and parrots and whatever. We can't distinguish what kind of love. So they always had to explain. So that's why I always say selfless love or self-love, and you will hear me talk like this. And that safe environment is created by the selfless love of father and the selfless love of mother. Then I belong. I'm part of this. I'm embraced. Otherwise, it's a performance-driven thing. I love you conditionally, so there you have to live up to this, and then I will, that creates fear. That does not create that safety, which children look for. And then the value thing that I alluded to already in reference to affirmation. So if you look at children and what they need, and you live selflessly towards them, then you discover huge things about the human being in general, and helping the human being to be authentic.
Let's talk about, you had mentioned before recording, just, and you hit on it just a little bit, this father wound and how impactful and powerful we can be as dads for our kids. And you mentioned this false self versus true self. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. Children grow up with needs. Now, some people mention 12 needs and so on. We need many things, and we need them in specific ages as well. If you do not get it, you're deprived of that. Now, if I deprive a baby of milk, just mother's milk that the baby needs for existence, to stay alive, then you see the impact of that. But now we deprive them of intimacy. For instance, mothers start to work shortly after giving birth. You know that the maternal leave, for instance, in Germany is 3 years for mothers. And at the same time, 15 months for fathers. Paternal leave at the same time. Now, we in most countries, we don't even know this. And then we just carry on after a few months, and we hurt the children through that. So intimacy, belonging, safety, that it's super important at the beginning, because acknowledging that, knowing, if the child cries or does something, that you are there, you see it, you make eye contact, says to the child, I'm authentic. I can be who I am. If they do not get that, and that's just intimacy, it could be many other things like affirmation and so on. If they do not get that basic needs met, resolved, then they adapt and adapt and adapt into becoming something that they think would be valued. And soon they learn some behavior, or they just deviate from their authentic self and they become a false self. And they could do it in different ways. And they become a false self, and then they grow up and become that person later on that they were not supposed to be originally. So, for instance, me and my wife, and I cut this short because this can drag for a long time. But I discovered that my true self is a waymaker. I want to make way for people. Want to give them opportunities. My false self is performer, because my dad trained me. Now, mine went into a positive curve, you can say, because he trained me to be a speaker. When I didn't want to speak, I was shy as a boy. He said, "You don't want to speak? I'll teach you how to speak." And then he sent me to someone that can teach me how to, to win a competition, actually, for saying poems and stuff like that. And I became a public speaker. Being a public speaker, I can do it well, people say, and I got my acknowledgement from public speaking, but that's not my true self. That is the performer. That's my false self. So that goes in you could call it a positive curve, positive in the sense of the values of the world. It could go into a negative curve. For instance, that you feel inferior and you react like that. You don't come to your real, to the fore. You stay with what I call your soul is the soul of a boy, because you don't mature inside yourself and you become the false self. And the false self and the soul of a boy is equated in many, many ways. They are equated in many ways. And so you stay this, but you don't really become that authentic, truest true of you, me, and live that. Because the authentic me is the contributor and the false one is the taker. Whether you perform or you undermine yourself or feel inferior, both are takers. But the true self is the contributor. And I think so many dads do not step up to be a real dad because they are still stuck with the soul of a boy or with the false self. And as soon as they see the value of the true self, they will step up to become real men and make a great contribution, not for themselves, but for the benefit of society.
Yeah,
That's
I have no, that is, it's so, this is going to be, I think, a podcast that I'm going to re-listen to a number of times, and there's some deep diving, and I'm curious. So I have a two-part question. It's from the perspective of the kid and then of the dad. And they're both dealing with time. So with this true self, my question from the perspective of the kid or the individual, I guess, how do you effectively get to a place in life? How do you effectively find that true self? Like, what is the mechanism by which I could find, that I believe I was intended to be a male model, that, God gave me this face and this beautiful head of hair for a reason. But I'm just curious, how would I not only find, but potentially, if I am mature enough to have found it, to validate it, to live in it. Yeah. And then I have a second follow on, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I cannot detach the false self and the true self. So the first thing to discover in many cases would be discover your false self. So for instance, in my case, I had to go back to my father wound, and my father wound is something is never great. It's always next time better, So you always into the performance mode. You're always pushing, and you always want to be better than the previous time, and so on. So that's the eternal endeavor then. My wife is different because she was neglected by mom because her mom got an illness, polio, and she had to be removed from mom. So she missed that intimacy. Now, we never knew about this before we got married. So we had to discover this, and by God's grace, we stay together in discovering it. But discover your father wound or your mother wound and the probable or possible impact of that. Now, it's very important that an objective person, because we can reason ourselves out of something so easily, but someone who knows you really well and say, you know what, you're behaving this way and so on, you're trying to draw this attention, someone who's really, really honest with you, but with love. with real love and say, let's go on a journey of discovering your false self, but also your true self. What is the truest true of you? Now, we do it now with hundreds of men. So we get them a paper and say, write down all the things on this paper that you would say, this is me. And get other people to write it down. Now, I have a strange relationship with, I call him Mr. Chat GPT. I've got a very unique relationship with him. Yeah, I talk with him every day. We argue every day. We discuss and we do many things. And then I give him all of this that people write down on a piece of paper. This is me. This is me. And I say, give me one word for this. And then he gives one word. And then I say, in this word, I think you are neglecting this. So I argue with him. And then he adds. And then I get, until I get a word that I think is the right. And then I say, define this word. And the amazing thing is when people define that word and they see that's me. But in many cases, it's not the me that they think that people would appreciate. But it's the me that gives them that deep fulfillment, that sense of, wow, if the world didn't shape me, I would have been that, And that's the real thing I can contribute. And it's super valuable if you do this. As couples, for instance, it is enormously valuable because God has distributed his character, his gifts, his everything amongst people to demonstrate and, to show him up in this world in all kinds of ways. So one can do it practically, and we help people to do it. But you need friends. You need someone who knows you really, really well and who loves you really well, and someone who wants to really mine, like you mine gold or diamonds, who really wants to mine the most precious thing that God invested in you for the benefit of this world, to mine it and to polish it and shape it. And when you see, and one father should know this of his children, so that you can continue to polish that uniqueness of your child. And then you'll see how valuable they become. So it's a fantastic adventure with wife, with friends, with children. So please, let's all dive into this and help each other.
Yeah, that's fascinating. The last thing you said too is very, very powerful from a perspective of a dad too. And we'll get into this later, the roles of the dad that you talk about, but to help identify and validate those things about our kids and really speak into that. That's super powerful. The other follow on from a time perspective that I wanted to ask you was, as a dad, a lot of us, we talk about it with our men's group a lot. Just these roles, and we talk about, we talk about resources that we didn't previously have to help us be more intentional fathers. And this book for me is huge, but I didn't have this book. My fault, not yours. You wrote it for my, when my 13-year-old was a baby. And so, you break down these times when it's most critical for specifically for dads to really speak identity and these different things in our kids' lives. What if you're a dad and you missed that because ignorance, or maybe you just were a terrible dad before, whatever the reason? Is it too late as a dad to do something about that?
Yeah, that's why I wrote chapter 10 in the book. If I had to revise the book now, I would put chapter 10 as chapter 4, because at chapter 3, you feel like, oh man, I've missed most of these things. So then it's a good thing to actually create hope to read chapter 10. Chapter 10 is restoring damage. So on one end, you got to not ignore the impact of what you neglected, because that would bring you, and in my case, I always think the tougher things get, the more it pushes you to contribute more. So then you will be more serious about a real contribution back in the life of your child. But the first thing to start with in chapter 10 is to really ask forgiveness to your children. And even at age 5, you can write, and you've got to write a letter. So chapter 10 is actually, how do I write this letter? Because if you don't do it according to the guidelines I give in chapter 10, it will most probably not work. So you better not skip one of the principles of writing that letter. You write that letter. I neglected this. I should have done this. Why did I neglect it? Because I was too ambitious or ignorant or whatever. You got to have an honest confession. And in my case, too self-absorbed with my ambition, my first child. And and I had to tell her when she was 17 years old, I'm sorry, because no one trained me. I didn't know these things. And then I started to discover that. And then that confession, that and you do it in a specific place with a specific meeting that you arrange, not just by the way in the kitchen. I'm sorry, I messed up, I'll try better. Not that way. A very specific letter, very specific occasion, and you make that confession and you say what you want to be from now on, and you say, I will give this to your mother, my wife, and to my mentor to keep me accountable to do it. When you do this to a child, the child says, it looks like dad is serious. Now I'll check him out for 6 months or whatever time limit they have in their mind, and I'll see if he's serious. And then I have seen, and this is what you say about your child last night, how quick they are really to forgive. They are quicker to forgive than it could be that they're in late teens. They want to check you out and test you out for a longer time. But when they are younger, they will accept it really well. And specifically when they are like 12, 13 years old, the rite of passage is very important. And that because at that one, it's not only a confession, but also your intent, how to walk this journey with them from that rite of passage to the next one when they become adults. And but if the children pick up that you're intentional, they may not like it, your intention, as much when they are I call them team agers, not teenagers. When they're teenagers, but later on in life, they will appreciate it enormously. So there is a way to correct, but now you've got to help your child, because your child may live with an impairment. For instance, if intimacy is neglected shortly after birth, then they may struggle to come close to people. Now the child has to train himself into closeness, into emotional connectedness. And you got to help your child. You better be the coach then to help your child. But so there's a lot that we can restore, and we should.
I hear vulnerability and intentionality and everything.
Oh, for sure. And vulnerability, I mean, humility precedes vulnerability. And so we better humble ourselves and then say, Lord, take whatever is left of this me and reshape it into what you want this to become. And then God honors that so much.
That's amazing. I knew this podcast would, there's a lot that I still want to cover. So there's you had mentioned at the very beginning with David's story about affirming our children, affirming the potential, the contribution that they can provide to the world. And you list out some other roles of the father. Can we kind of go through those quickly? You mentioned affirmation already. How about establishing moral authority? What does that mean as the father?
Yeah, the four main roles I got from, I adopted a daughter. We adopted a daughter at 15 years old, a black girl from a very poor township, orphan. And when she called me daddy, my heart just melted. That was the first time in her life to call anyone daddy, was when she was 15 years old. And so I felt so honored when she called me daddy, and I had to respond. Do I say Abungile or do I say my daughter? And the moment that I said my daughter, the deal was sealed. And I knew that. So I had to make that decision in 5 seconds. But that night, I was a complete mess. I lay on my bed and I cried the whole night. I said, Lord, what are you doing to me? And the Lord mostly starts his sentence when he talks to me, you fool. I read this also in the Psalms when he says, man of dust. Actually, so, you're fool. You think that Abungile came to you so that you can help her? I'm sorry. She came that she can help you. And I then had to sign up and say, okay, no one trained me to be a dad. And then I studied the Bible, every single verse that says Father, Abram, or whatever it says. But when the word Father is there, I studied them all. And then I came, because I had the sense there must be a framework for fathers in the Bible. And then I came upon the baptism of Jesus and the mountain of transfiguration, the 4 things that God the Father said to his son. This is my son, identity. Whom I love, that's that hug, emotional security. With whom I'm well pleased, that is affirmation. And then on the mountain of transfiguration, listen to him. That's moral authority. And when I saw that, then I wrote the book. This is how the book started, actually. And then I wrote the book, and I thought, I'll write the book on this. But I'm just starting with moral authority because it's God the Father's authority that must permeate everything in the home. And so how to live a life of moral authority. That is chapter 6. That's key. And then identity. How do you confer identity? And you have different elements to confer identity. And then the emotional security, which is the key to heaven at home. Without that understanding of love, no heaven. And with that, the affirmation and the joyful atmosphere that we need. And that leads to the last one. This is my son, whom I love, with whom I well please, the affirmation. So those are the fourfold main responsibilities of a dad. At that stage, I did not know that when we research what is needed in the life of a child, that we actually discover the same fourfold need in the life of a child. And then the science and the Bible corresponded, and obviously, I love it.
Yeah, that is I'll tell you, there are a couple things that happened as you were just talking. So one, I was imagining not only for you, but as a daddy, but for your daughter, just the exchange of those words, right? Like it got me emotional. I'm glad you kept talking because I don't know if I could ask a question at that moment because it just, the power of conveying that identity of like my kid, like I'm thinking about my kids and I'm like, you are my son. You know, the other day I talked to them about being a Gutierrez, like that's our last name. And I'm like, hey, let's talk about this. Like you are, no matter how much you fight, it was born from me yelling at all my kids and then bringing them downstairs and looking them in the eyes and be like, here's the deal. Like we all share a name and we share blood and we are family. And that was all God, putting that in my head because all I wanted to do was like, you are all about to expire because you're driving me nuts and I'm gonna end you. but it just the power of that, I can imagine it, just visceral, just love and her shoulders going back like I have a daddy, right? And I just it made me emotional, but I'm one of the things you highlight, I just want to read this this quote that you put in the book from Stephen Baskerville. And because I mentioned this to a buddy of mine, my chiropractor, this morning. I mentioned this quote, and he was completely shocked by it. And I think most people are. But the quote is: virtually every major social pathology has been linked to fatherlessness. Violent crime, drug and alcohol abuse, teen pregnancy, suicide, all correlate more strongly to fatherlessness than to any other single factor. That's data. That's science. And my question for you is, you asked a question before we hit record: is this a faith-based or a secular? But how do you face, or do you face challenges in conveying this message to the secular world? And how do you overcome that? Because a lot of this is rooted in what we believe on this call to be truth, to be God, to be Jesus. But it is truth no matter what. And how do you have those conversations with the secular world?
I train every year in countries that are not predominantly Christian faith. And I train the leaders of their faith groups. And I'm not going to mention a nation, but one of these nations have accepted that all their social workers in the whole nation, all of them, should be trained by the book. And that is not a Christian country. Why? Because facts. You say data, I think, or data, we would say. So that's just what it is. So we can give you research results on all of those separately, teenage pregnancy, incarceration, and all of that. So we can give you research results on each of those things. So you can't ignore it. These are just facts. And these are facts that we struggle with. I mean, violence and crime in South Africa. I mean, in South Africa, they kill 85 people per day in South Africa, average per day. So where does this come from? South Africa's fatherlessness, 67% of our children do not have the 67% do not have their biological fathers at home. 62% of our children do not have the name of a father on the birth certificate. So now we try and address the issue of violence and crime by what? Getting more police, by building more prisons. Oh my goodness. That's why a few weeks ago, I was working in the prison, because in the prison, working with these inmates and saying to them, guys, come on. When you leave this prison, when you get parole, what father are you going to be? Otherwise, your children will end up exactly where you are, because this is what statistics also say. So how can we turn the clock back? How can we start at the root of things? And therefore, any society, my concern, and I don't actually get as much pushback as you may guess. I almost get no pushback, because they may feel and sense there's something spiritually behind this. Now, I found a way of explaining the uniqueness of Christ without using his name. Because you just explain Christ by saying selfless sacrificial love. But the problem with Christians, and can I just say this blatantly, the problem that Christians do not have this influence and this light shining across the world lies exactly there. They do not understand love. They think your love, when you are loved, is reciprocal. That's no. And you've got to love yourself. That is the mantra, before you can love someone else. That's absolute nonsense. It maybe sounds psychologically good, but change the word. Say, you got to value yourself. Don't use the word love there. You got to value yourself, because you're created by the creator of the universe and you're his son. So you got to value yourself. But Jesus said, a new law I give to you. And remember, when he says love yourself, it was in his talk with Pharisees. So he talked the language of the Pharisees. When he said a new law, he didn't speak that language. John chapter 13, verse 34 and 35, he said, a new law I give you. Love one another. How? As I have loved you. Which means you love the other first. And if that is not applied in homes, in Christian homes, why would people that are not Christian be drawn to our message? If we cannot change homes into heaven at home, if your wife and children do not say, this is heaven at home, what message do we have? And this is the thing that I hope to create homes that have heaven at home. And you cannot have heaven without selfless, sacrificial love from all ends in the house. That's the key to inviting heaven to home. I don't know if you know the story about heaven and hell, that they are the same, with big tables of great food. But when you enter the door to heaven and hell, they fix your elbow so you can't bend your arm. And then they fix a spoon to your hand so that you all go into heaven and hell like this. But in hell, it is hell because you try and feed yourself, and that's the gnashing of the teeth. But in heaven, it's so easy. You don't think of yourself, and you just turn the spoon because your arm is fixed, and you feed the one next to you. And that's what makes it heaven. And that is the uniqueness of the Christian love. And if we can't do that, then we can forget about the rest. We have no message. So, but we can have heaven at home. I don't want to let it sound like a negative thing. I want everyone to jump up with joy and say, man, this is our message. You know, if we surrender, if we die, we live. You know, this is the paradox of the Bible. So if we do not self-love, but we love others. But please remember, I said, value yourself. Otherwise, I get phone calls from psychologists and everyone. Value yourself, value yourself, value yourself. I've said it now 3 times. But love others first. That's the message of the Bible.
Love it. It's amazing. I've never heard that story of heaven and hell with the spoon in your arms. I'm going to share that. Cassie, this has been an amazing conversation. We're already at the hour mark. Like we knew would happen. We could probably go for longer. Maybe we'll have to invite you back for part 2 and 3 and more. where do we send people to find out more about your message and everything that you're doing? Get the book, learn more about your courses, your teachings. What do we put in the show notes for people?
Yeah. We have, if you go to the website, you will see we have now more than 100 nations involved in the movement. So you just go down, scroll down country and the contact person in that country, and you can contact that person in your nation. So the website is easy. You can type "the world needs a father" if you wish, and you'll get there. But otherwise, it's just the abbreviation, the world needs a TWNAF, TWNAF.com. And if you go there, you can find how to connect with us, and feel free to connect with us. We'd love to help and assist.
Love it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful website, and like you said, huge partnership. And before we sign off, Cassie, I just want to honor you. I think this work is so needed. It's powerful, and it's literally saving lives. But it's not just lives; it's generationally. I had not thought about until I read it in your book, and it's science backed, that's developing, that the grandparents and great grandparents have on future generations, and that they had on me, almost unwittingly, to them and to me to an extent, until I read it in your book, right? And I think the idea of empowering men in particular to hold this role literally changes generations of lives, and gets people more towards eternity, and focused on the things that truly matter, and the impact and the power of honestly, like it has me having a sense of responsibility to share Christ with my unborn grandchildren and great grandchildren through
Yes.
the way I live and model life every day. And that is not, it's not overwhelming. It's a joy to be able to hold that level of responsibility and to intentionally live life in that way. And so you are never going to realize the extent of your influence, and just the gifts that you've given millions of people, I'm sure, at this point, until you get to heaven, and God says to you, "Hey, job well done, my good and faithful servant." And I fully believe there's gonna be lots of people trying to feed you in heaven, just as a thank you. So I just want to acknowledge you, and just express my eternal gratitude. There's a lot of books that have impacted us, but very few that have the level of profound impact that your book has, and that you you blessed us and graced us with. And a lot of people in our network, quite frankly, know your name very well. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Stu. It's great to be with you guys, and thank you for what you're doing, because you're sowing the seeds.
Well, thank you, sir. Guys and gals, reach out to Cassie. Get his book. It is, like David said, one of the most impactful books that we've read. We tell everybody, we give it as gifts now to all of our network. Go read the book. Check out the website. Check out all the resources. Cassie, thanks again.
Bless you.